WAFT.
Welcome to Brian Lehrer Live. We are here live every Wednesday night this month at 7 o'clock, and our phones are always open at the number on your screen. Tonight, two Democrats who want to be mayor and an author who says our last Republican mayor saved New York. And we'll watch an excerpt of a new documentary film from the Bronx Artists Festival called Estilo Hip Hop. Our two Democrats who want to be mayor are Manhattan Borough President C. Virginia Fields and Congressman Anthony Weiner from parts of Brooklyn and Queens. Now, this is the first of three shows we'll be doing this month with pairs of mayoral candidates. Congressman, Borough President, welcome to Brian Lehrer Live.
Thank you, Brian.
I want to try to do 5 things with you tonight: your hopes, your experience, the stadium, affordable housing, and firefighters. Let's see how much we can get to.
If we get 3 of 5, we should call it a good night.
How much time do we have?
And let's start with your hopes. Virginia Fields, why do you want to be mayor?
My hopes and my dreams and aspiration is to lead the greatest city in the world so that I can address issues that I know are important to people who live here. The priorities that affect our daily lives as it relates to building better schools, more affordable housing, creating jobs, helping small businesses to grow, creating opportunities so that more can enjoy the things that New York City has to provide. So it's really opening the city up once again to more rather than a few. And I believe that my experiences have certainly prepared me for this, and I'm ready to do it.
Why do you want to be mayor?
I just have a sense the city has always gotten better and better and greater, and that each generation has left a New York successively better than the generation before. And I feel that we're at a point now in New York City history that we really are in danger of not doing that for the next generation, particularly for so many of the middle-class New Yorkers in New York who, you know, the opportunities for their families are frankly getting narrower and narrower and less. And I think that we've kind of lost sight of that. We've become a city that's become a little bit too obsessed with the big project, the big idea, rather than thinking about the small things that New York does so well.
So complete the following sentence for me, Congressman. If I am elected mayor, judge me first and foremost on...
Well, the opportunities for small businesses and for middle-class families. You know, the idea that this is going to be a city that's going to be hospitable not just for the very, very wealthy, but for the kind of families like the one I came from in Brooklyn and Queens that, you know, that every day kind of struggle. They take the subways, they use the public schools, but they have a sense, I think, that New York is starting to be focused too much, not necessarily on their concerns and their families.
Borough President, judge me first and foremost on...
Jobs for the chronically unemployed. We've all heard the statistics of over 50% or so African-American men unemployed, 40% so of Latino men. Let's put New Yorkers back to work by opening up opportunities, creating them. And I also want to be judged in terms of support for our elderly. I'm very focused on creating opportunities for more of our elderly to remain in their communities, living independently as well as with dignity. With a growing senior population, I think that is incredibly important.
All right, the firefighters. The main firefighters union and the mayor are at odds over response time. He says they're slowing down response time as an unacceptable and irresponsible contract negotiation tool. They say he's forcing the slowdown with his policies about red lights and closing firehouses. Let me play a clip of the mayor from his WABC radio show last Friday on this and get your reaction.
The union is, number one, they shouldn't be setting the regulations. That's up to the commissioner and the city to set the regulations. Number two, they've been giving misinformation to the firefighters. They say that the city won't defend you. The truth of the matter is the city defends every firefighter, including one who was disciplined for being involved in a fatal accident. And there's an allegation that the conduct was inappropriate, that he didn't exercise the kind of judgment you want. I think the other thing you've got to recognize here is this is a very few people with an agenda trying to slow down and hurt this city. there's something over a quarter of all the engines have had better response time. So when they say, you know, that the closing firehouses 2 years ago had something to do with response times, that's ridiculous.
Borough President, whose side do you take in this dispute?
Well, first of all, let me say that's quite an accusation, and obviously, if any of that is true, it has to be followed up and actions must be taken. However, having said that, I believe that the firefighters of our city, people who really care about this city, putting their lives in danger every time they go out on a call, and to intentionally jeopardize the safety of residents and citizens has not been my experience. I do not accept that in terms of what the mayor is saying, but I think we all have to recognize that the relationship that the mayor has with firefighters as well as other municipal labor unions has not shown goodwill. It has not fostered the kind of communication and cooperation that I know is needed between a mayor and our municipal workers, including firefighters. So I, have faith in our firefighters and believe that they are people who are responsible and will do the best things for New Yorkers in terms of safety and other services.
Congressman, whose side do you take?
Well, I think long before this flap about whether or not fire trucks were coming to complete stops at lights and the like, response time was up. Response time was up first and foremost. It seems intuitive to me. When you close firehouses in communities, you're traveling a further distance to get to calls. Response times are going to be up. The firehouses should not have been closed. The city council shouldn't have gone along with it. The mayor shouldn't have done it. And I think that at the very core of this, who is right in this dispute, I would agree with Borough President Fields in that the mayor has created such ill will with this group of very important New Yorkers, firefighters, because of the way that he's approached contract negotiations across the board. He has triangulated against city workers. He's taken the old corporate model of seeing city workers as liabilities rather than assets, which is the way I would see them. I don't know who's right and who's wrong in this dispute, but I can tell you the product of the increase of the response times, you can track back to the closure of firehouses.
Would you reopen those firehouses if you're elected mayor?
Yes, I will.
Would you?
Yes, and especially in areas where we had started to see growth. For example, the one on 125th Street. We had encouraged businesses to come into those areas. We had encouraged housing to be built in the area. And as soon as the community started growing and coming back, we removed vital city services. It makes no sense.
All right. The stadium. Assembly Speaker Sheldon Silver will likely cast a vote one way or another if he shows up to the Public Authorities Control Board meeting this Friday. Said he might not show up. That could make or break a West Side stadium. How would you advise him to vote?
Well, if he doesn't show up, then they will not have the unanimous 3 votes that are needed. I'm opposed to the stadium and have consistently expressed that opposition over the past 4 years or so while this has been under discussion. I support affordable housing at the site where a stadium is being proposed to be developed. I believe that the vote should be postponed until after a decision is made about the Olympics. We should not allow the International Olympics Committee dictate to New York City where a stadium should be built.
But the mayor and the NYC 2012 folks say that will mean a definite no from the Olympics Committee.
But that's my point. I think the International Olympics Committee must be assured that we will provide an Olympic stadium. Where that is built, I don't believe that they have the right, and the mayor should not have given them the right to make that determination.
And we don't have enough information yet to decide pro or con for the stadium. We've been debating this as a city nonstop for months and months and months.
I think we probably have sufficient information, and what we do know, which is different from what we were initially told, that the stadium would be self-financing. We are seeing public dollars now being allocated towards the stadium. So the information that has come out is very different from the initial financial information, and I think that is reason, too, to be very concerned, because we are indebting taxpayers in terms of the future more costs.
Congressman Weiner, how should Sheldon Silver vote?
Well, I think you should vote no, at least for now. The idea that we've got all the information we need, this was constructed in a way is to prevent public input, prevent real public information from getting into the system. In April of last year, I did a report looking at past football stadiums around the country and how expensive they became. And I said I wanted to see a signature on the dotted line from the Jets saying they would pay any overruns. I was derided by the Bloomberg administration of exaggerating. It turned out the expenses have already risen to more than $1 billion more than what they've estimated.
But didn't they get that promise that they will cover the cost overruns and the public will not?
They absolutely got that promise in a very nice press release that everyone's been talking about, but I've seen the Memorandum of Understanding, and it doesn't say that in the MOU. And frankly, that's something that Sheldon Silver's been talking about, is how much public liability there really is for this stadium. I have said as far back as April, Borough President Field's been very kind in crediting me with this idea, and it was my idea. Build it at Willets Point, Queens. If I were the Olympic Committee, I would be saying exactly what they're saying, which is saying that there's a deadline, there's a deadline, there's a deadline. If I had $1 for every deadline they claim there was in this thing, I'd have enough to build the stadium on my own. They keep talking about the deadline. This is not about what's good for the Olympics. This is about what's good for the people of the city of New York. That should be what the mayor of the city of New York is focused on.
Now, the mayor of the city of New York, Michael Bloomberg, says this is what's best for the people of New York because the real reason for this facility, which is a stadium, or he likes to call it a convention center, or part of the convention complex, is for the convention and tourism business, and that whatever tax revenues get put into this in the short term are going to come back in spades in the long term because this is an economic growth project.
In that case, I would say let this thing rise and fall as an economic growth project. Let's be deliberative about it. He goes back and forth. He has had more personalities on this issue than Sybil. First it's an Olympic thing, then it's a convention thing, then it's a both. Look, I believe we should expand the Javits Center to accommodate conventions. I believe we should even look about, if you want to have a multi-use facility, what's so preposterous about having a multi-use facility in Queens?
So the two of you agree on this. Michael Bloomberg is a self-made billionaire. Why shouldn't our viewers trust his judgment on economic growth more than the two of yours?
It's not so much about trusting for me, it's a matter of choice and priorities. I, too, am very focused on economic growth and development. Building a stadium in Queens will also create economic growth and development. It will allow us to move into another borough, build hotels, appropriate commercial space, and begin to grow regional development centers outside of the center of Manhattan.
The mayor says that the Jets would never sink $600 million, $800 million, whatever it is, into a stadium in Queens because they're not going to get as much out of it. So that would actually require more of a taxpayer investment.
Can I say, has Mike Bloomberg been right one time in this whole process? He said that the land over the Hudson River Yards was worth $100 million. This modified open process said it's worth at least $300 million, and a lot of land use people like Dick Ravitch say it's worth $1 billion. Why doesn't anyone ask Mike Bloomberg, this brilliant businessman, how he got it so dreadfully wrong? And the level of disdain that they talk about the idea of coming to Queens, well, I would point out, and I believe you did as well, they call them the Jets because they are near the airport in Queens. If you're going to bring the Jets home, bring them back to where they were. This notion that, well, why would the Jets ever want to play in Queens? Mike Bloomberg isn't from New York. I am. I can tell you there was a time they played in Queens, and they played quite well, I would point out.
And I would like to add to, again, it's not a matter for me, again, of who is right or wrong, but it is a matter of priorities and choices. And the mayor's choice and priority has been the West Side, despite lack of input from the public in terms of whether they're public polls or public meetings. From elected officials, the support for not having a stadium there, the lack of support, I should say, is overwhelming. So it is his decision, and that's why I was interested in, I think someone had mentioned earlier, when he announced the decision that about after the sale, that the people had spoken. People did not speak. New Yorkers did not speak. Mayor Michael Bloomberg made the decision.
Let's take a phone call. This is Kenny on the Upper West Side, a supporter of the stadium as proposed, I believe. Kenny, you're on Brian Lehrer Live. Hi.
Brian, it's Kenny Kramer. How you doing?
How are you?
Pretty good, thanks.
The Kenny Kramer?
I guess Kenny Kramer, the person on whom the character Kramer in Seinfeld was based, and he ran as a minor party candidate for mayor, did Kenny Kramer 4 years ago. So, you called about the stadium?
Yes, I live like 4 blocks from the proposed site of the stadium, And I just want to make a comment that, you know, we have the largest city in the world with the 14th largest convention center. Building a stadium in Queens is not going to help the Javits Center at all. This whole thing about the Jets and the traffic is just such a ridiculous argument because the Jets will play 8 games a year there on a Sunday. So that's just a completely false.
Wait a minute, you live in, I think I know the complex you live in, and it's very close to the stadium.
Exactly.
I
right
remember
next
from
door.
when I interviewed you, but wait, I thought the people in the neighborhood don't want it there, because it's pain.
Those are those people. They seem to be louder and more verbal than those of us that do want it there. You know, we're losing a fortune of money in convention business. We have the 14th largest convention center in the country. Every week we're losing conventions to Minneapolis and Orlando and Las Vegas and Chicago. And we really need that expanded space for the Javits Center in order to have a competitive edge on all these fabulous money-making conventions that we're losing out on.
Okay, thank you for calling. Real quick, because I want to move on to some other issues.
First of all, I support expanding the Javits Center. He said there's only going to be 9 dates a year for the Jets. Well, how many conventions do we think there are that you need an 80,000-seat stadium to accommodate? There aren't that many. I say expand the Javits Center. In many ways, I think Mike Bloomberg has won that debate. We need more convention space. Let's build it on the west side. Let's try to do what we can to accommodate the large conventions. Maybe we don't get the 8 or 9 uber conventions in the country, but frankly, we're not going to get all of them anyway.
But one last thing on this. If this is going to attract so few events a year, why are the people who own Madison Square Garden so concerned about the competition from a new stadium?
You know what? I really don't care about Madison Square Garden. And frankly, there's no one with clean hands, and the sooner these ads end, the better for me. But I think that the mayor and Cablevision, that's not what the issue is. The issue should be what's best for the people of the city of New York. Our tax dollars, our scarce resources, and if we agree there are going to be few events there, and I think there are few conventions, Mr. Kramer thinks there are going to be few football games, do we really need a big piece of dead real estate in the middle of the west side, the most vibrant community in America?
And we need housing that's going to be occupied 100% of the time as opposed to a stadium that's going to be occupied for less % of the time.
Thank you for providing my segue into the topic of housing. At the Memorial Day Parade in Whitestone, Queens on Monday, Mayor Bloomberg said, quote, crime has come down in all of the 5 boroughs, schools are doing better in all 5 boroughs, housing prices are going up in all 5 boroughs, streets are spotlessly clean in all 5 boroughs. The line in there that I'm curious about is housing prices are going up in all 5 boroughs. Is that a good thing?
No, not for the majority of people who live in this city. We're seeing a time where certainly demand far exceeds supply. And 1 out of 5 New Yorkers are paying 50% or more of their income for rent. And the majority of these people are at the lower socioeconomic level. So it's not a good thing. They're not able to buy the houses because they cannot afford it. They're not able to afford the rent. And working people with higher incomes are having problems with respect to the housing costs. So he's correct that it is going up.
He sees
but
it as
is going up
a sign
for
of
just a
prosperity.
limited number of people. And I say we have to provide housing for all New Yorkers.
Is it a bad thing? Is it not a sign of prosperity, of desirability?
I disagree with the borough president here that it's not a bad thing. But what it is it represents a challenge, and it also represents a blind spot in the mayor's assessment of how the city is doing. You know, you take a family who lives in Sunnyside. They had a $300,000 home 5 years ago. Now they have a $600,000-$700,000 home. But they're not moving. They're still fundamentally a middle-class family that can't flip into another home. They're living there. So what have they seen? They've seen an exponential increase in their taxes, which is why I've proposed a tax cut for middle-class New Yorkers. For those who are renters, they're seeing more and more rental apartments being turned into co-ops and condos because of the spike in property values. For a small business, a pizzeria, a shoe store, and an out-of-borough shopping strip, the property values rises. I mean, they're getting priced out. You're getting more and more Starbucks and less, Pino's pizzerias. So I think what it shows is the lens that the mayor looks at the city through. He doesn't realize that for middle-class New Yorkers, for the small businesses of New York, the rise in property values is really creating a challenge at the same time it's adding prosperity for some.
Borough President, I read that last week you proposed an affordable housing plan that would create 10,000 new units and preserve another 8,000 over 10 years. Is that accurate?
That's accurate.
Mayor Bloomberg says he's already got 26,000 units in development, on his way to 68,000. Are you proposing to actually do less than him?
No, we're not proposing. In terms of the numbers, obviously, it's less. But our focus, again, are on lower income moderate, middle-income people. Mayor Bloomberg's proposal does not address that population.
I thought that his specifically is an affordable housing development plan.
The last proposal that he put on 4,500 units using the Battery Park City monies will begin to address that 4,500 units. That's why, as I said, in terms of looking at the numbers, it appears that we might be doing less. But when you look at the 10,000 units in terms of who they are targeted to, our population is very different. It is that population, when I answered earlier, it's not so much whether it is good or bad in terms of prices going up, but we are missing a majority of people in this city who are not able to afford housing. And that any subsidies and incentives to build affordable housing, I think, should address that population.
And so what would define affordable under your plan, and who would be eligible?
Right. We're looking at people who, make anywhere from $20,000, $25,000 up to the $40,000, $45,000 range, because they are being squeezed out.
That's relatively low income in the city.
Right, low to moderate, moving to, slightly higher area.
And how would you finance these
Well,
new
we
units?
will start with the income from the Battery Park City trust fund that was established specifically to build affordable housing. We have talked about using revenue from sales of tax revenues from sales of some of the Michelamas, because we have Michelamas that are moving out or selling out at record prices here, especially in Manhattan. And so a series of incentive packages that we would put together in terms of inclusionary zoning.
Do you have an affordable housing plan?
Yeah, it's a slightly different focus. Again, it focuses on the middle class. Look, my view is that we have some of the finest public housing, although it's criticized. It's some of the best public housing in the country. We have dramatically stopped subsidizing improvements to public housing on the federal level, and the way that Mayor Bloomberg has been silent on that has been a real disservice to New York. But what we haven't been doing is, when we have these so-called 80-20 programs that incentivize the creation of lower rate housing by saying, you know what, you build 80% at market rate, the 20% is really for relatively poor people, and you heard it characterized here as in a neighborhood of 40,000 in South. That is about what the programs are doing now. I think we need to go to a model that's more in the 60-20-20 range. Listen, the property values have risen to such a meteoric level. You don't need as many units at market rate to make a very, very healthy profit. And I think we need to be saying to developers in places like Greenpoint and Williamsburg, and places like the west side of Manhattan, should it be developed, that, you know what, the valuable asset that we have in New York is the control of the land. In exchange for these zoning things, we're going to require that you do some building for middle-class New Yorkers, and I define it as those making $150,000 a month.
We're almost out of time. Our next guest is going to be Fred Siegel, who wrote a book about Mayor Giuliani.
Right.
You were quoted, Congressman, in the New York Observer last week by Ben Smith saying, Mayor Bloomberg has adopted some of the worst traits of Rudy without continuing some of the best things about him, and you would try to do the opposite. On the other hand, the Observer article says you were the only one to speak up at a recent candidates forum when asked if anybody thought the city would be better off if Ruth Messinger had been elected mayor in 1997, and you said Democrats are categorically superior to Republicans. Is that your belief?
It is my belief. There's no job that a Democrat can't do better than a Republican.
We'd be better off today if Messinger had been elected in 97.
Look, I am a loyal Democrat, and I vote for Democrats. I campaign for Democrats, and it makes my blood boil when we have people that go support Republicans, because at the end of the day, you get Republicans like George Pataki, and a lot of my Democratic brothers and sisters supported him, and he's done nothing but disservice to New York.
So how would you be like Rudy?
Well, I guess I'd be like Rudy in my focus on the outer borough neighborhood zeitgeist of the city, remembering that middle-class New Yorkers are the bread and butter of New York, remembering that those who strive to get into the middle class are who we should be thinking about all the time. And I'd also be something else. I'd be fiercely determined to keep crime down. I would be someone who would be very focused on waging battles on behalf of New Yorkers, even if they weren't in the prescribed box of what my job description was.
I hear that one other way that you agree with Mayor Giuliani is that you would eliminate the mayor's smoking ban. Is that correct?
That is not correct.
What would you do?
No, I was asked on whether or not I would have approached it differently, and the one difference I would have found with the smoking ban that was passed is I would have kept in mind those small neighborhood pubs that predominate in my district and in the outer boroughs, where their whole reason for being is a place where people can go and smoke. I think it's a false choice between health and economic development,
so you would roll
and I
it
would
back,
try to do.
You would roll it back some.
No, I frankly don't. I don't believe we don't have the jurisdiction to do it anymore. We're preempted by the state. I was asked if I was the mayor at the time, would I have done things differently, and I would have been much more sensitive to small businesses.
Real quick, Borough President, the two of you agree with each other on most things. Why would you be better than him as mayor?
Something I've been wondering too.
Well, I like to keep him in Congress. I think he's doing a fabulous job there. So let's keep him there doing that.
Why would you be a better mayor?
Well, I think that, again, in terms of my focus and what I bring to the position, experience, knowledge, training ground in government that has been extensive all the way from community boards, city council, borough presidents, and my view of the city, as I think we've talked about it somewhat, there are some differences there, even in terms of the groups we focus on with respect to housing. So while I think Anthony Weiner is a great congressman,
so wait a minute,
I want to keep him there. So when I go to Washington to fight for this city and working with the delegation, I want him there on my team.
So you're the candidate of the poor, he's the candidate of the middle class?
No, I would not say that. I am the candidate for all people of New York City and can focus on not just those who are at the middle class, the wealthy, as well as those who are at the lower end of our socioeconomic
20 seconds.
level.
Why would you be the better mayor than her?
Well, I honor Virginia for her service to our city. She's been a great borough president. It was my honor to serve with her in the city council. It's just a different approach. I have what I think is a series of specific proposals about looking forward, not looking back, the idea of trying to transform New York's economy, transform New York landscape. But I can tell you something, I would run to the polls to vote for Virginia Fields over Mike Bloomberg.
Congressman, thank you.
Thank you.
Borough President, thank
Thank
you very
you,
much.
Brian.
Nice
And
to see
so
you.
much
Nice
for
to see you,
tonight's candidates who want to be the first Democratic mayor since 1993. Coming up, Fred Siegel, author of a new book about Mayor Rudy Giuliani called The Prince of the City, in which Giuliani is compared to Machiavelli in a good way. This is Brian Lehrer Live.
As you know, paper comes from trees.
Paper comes from trees.
Paper comes from trees. Every time trees are destroyed to make paper, we lose something that can't be replaced.
We lose the air we breathe.
The soil that grows our food. Wildlife. And our home.
And their home.
You have the power to stop this.
You have the power to stop this.
You have the power to stop this.
Insist that the paper you buy is tree-free.
Insist on it.
Insist on it.
Help us win the paper campaign.
Prominent professors, outstanding students, illustrious alumni, all on the Emmy-nominated magazine show about CUNY. Hi, I'm Valerie Vasquez. Join us every week as we bring you stories about the people and programs that make CUNY a place where you study with the best.
This is Brian Lehrer Live. We are here every Wednesday night during the month of June at 7 o'clock, and our phones are always open at the number on your screen. The New York Times had an op-ed piece today revealing that Rudy Giuliani has been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. See that? Wherever you go, it seems, people just can't stop loving or hating the larger-than-life former mayor. The newest book about Rudy loves him to pieces. In fact, this book may be the most meticulously researched Valentine in the history of love. It also tears David Dinkins' political legacy to shreds, and it's the only political book I've ever seen that compares a modern-day politician to Machiavelli as a good thing. The book is The Prince of the City, Giuliani, New York, and the Genius of American Life, published by Encounter Books. The author is Fred Siegel, a history professor at Cooper Union and a senior fellow with the centrist Democrat think tank, the Progressive Policy Institute. Fred, thanks for coming on, and congratulations on the new book.
Thank you.
I want to give our viewers a little political context about you first, because you are with a Democratic Party think tank, but you're best known as kind of a conservative on urban issues. How do you see yourself?
I think that's right. I think that the great failure of the Democratic Party in the past 30 years has been on urban issues, an unwillingness to deal with the decline of the cities. And in the early 1990s, and I talk about this in the book, you had really a bipartisan group of people known as the New Paradigm Society, people from both sides of the aisle who wanted to rethink city government. And you had a series of mayors that emerged from this, Democrats and Republicans. You have guys like Goldsmith and Giuliani, Democrats like Norquist, Wellington, Webb, and they really came to a remarkable consensus on a whole range of issues. For one thing, they, unlike David Dinkins, they all saw that Washington wasn't good for cities, that Washington was a big part of the problem. Webb, Wellington Webb, the African-American mayor of Denver, unfortunately unknown figure in American life, gave a wonderful speech talking about comparing Washington to the Air Force, engaging a bombing campaign. He said, sometimes they hit the target, but often there was an enormous amount of collateral damage. The best thing to do is to just get them to stop.
Let me stop you for a minute on Washington is bad for cities. Don't we need Washington's tax money in cities that have such a concentration of poor people?
It's the other way around. Washington needs the city's tax money. We, New York, Los Angeles, we send much more to Washington, much more. Senator Moynihan was always pointing this out than we get back. And Washington handcuffs us with regulations and costly requirements for spending that are judgments better made at home. So no, Washington, in fact, one of the interesting things about the 1990s in the book is cities revived in the 1990s in part because the Clinton administration and the Republicans in Congress pulled back on urban policy and let mayors lead on their own.
Machiavelli, perhaps the most famous passage from Machiavelli's The Prince, written in Italy in 1505, for those who haven't studied it, is this: it must be understood that a prince cannot observe all of those virtues for which men are reputed good, because it is often necessary to act against mercy, against faith, against humanity, against frankness, against religion, in order to preserve the state. Is this the basic idea behind Rudy Giuliani being the prince of the city?
Well, you have to be careful with this, Brian. The key idea behind Giuliani is the notion of pious cruelty. The founding fathers loved Machiavelli because Machiavelli was a small r Republican. He believed that republics required virtue to succeed. And he criticized politicians like David Dinkins. There's a passage in Machiavelli where he talks about politicians who speak of nothing but compassion and virtue, but deliver poverty and evil. And essentially that was the Dinkins years. Or you go back to any prior liberal, John Lindsay. Endless talk of compassion, but functionally delivering poverty and crime.
You're a history professor, focusing mostly on the history of the United States, but is history, or is the way people perceive history unfair to Machiavelli? Because mostly we think of him as somebody whose machinations were in the pursuit of his own power, not necessarily the good of the people.
Well, you're wrong on both counts here, Brian. One, I also teach what used to be called Western Civ before the PC people came over.
What's it called now?
We now call it text and textuality. I just ignore it, that title, that is. But no, that is a misconception of Machiavelli. Machiavelli's core concern was the revival of the Republic, of what we think of as virtue in politics. The core idea of Machiavelli, there's a famous line in Machiavelli which says, I'd rather be respected than loved. Excuse me, it's better to be feared than loved. And Giuliani's version of it is, I'd rather be respected than loved. The key here is a shift in virtues. Under Dinkins, we talked endlessly about compassion and community, et cetera, et cetera. Giuliani talked about work and responsibility and accountability. He shifted the value structure of the political debate. Not completely, because we see in Bloomberg a kind of more competent version of Dinkins in office. But for temporarily, Giuliani shifted the debate, the idea of what made a city successful. And just let me continue in that vein. Under Dinkins and people like and prior mayors, poverty was an industry. The key to Giuliani, the most important success Giuliani had, and I got to go split here for a second. You talk about a Valentine. Most people who read the book don't agree with you. They describe it as a warts and all picture of a great mayor. Giuliani's most important contribution is the revival of outer borough neighborhoods, including Harlem here, non-Midtown neighborhoods. because by reducing crime, he allowed public life to come back. He allowed people to live a good city life again. That idea of upward mobility was lost in New York. And here, the assumption of the book is you have to understand, and this, especially for people who weren't here in the early 90s, what the early 90s were like in New York. We lost, in the early 90s, we lost 1/4, we're 3% of the population, we lost 25% of the jobs in the economic downturn. This was not a problem politically. But when Dinkins, easy to confuse them, when Dinkins tried to lay off a few thousand public workers, there was an enormous geschrei. The roof was falling and terrible things were happening. Three incidents remind me of the early 90s. One of them is then Parks Commissioner Betsy Gottbaum, who did a good job as Parks Commissioner, standing in front of the lake in Central Park, giving a press conference. And as she's talking about the genuine improvements in Prospect Park, in Central Park, a dead body comes bobbing to the surface. The second is an interview between Dinkins and Marcia Kramer of CBS TV. Kramer says the aggressive panhandlers, aggressive homeless have driven her out of the city. Dinkins' response is, sorry you left, sorry you're still that I can't continue to raise your taxes. And the third example is a debate that took place after Dinkins was defeated. This was cut. The original version of the book was 40,000 words longer. Dinkins comes before the council and gives a speech about the most proudly progressive government in the world. Following weeks, a terrible debate breaks out in the council. Who is the greater victim? The Irish drivers who drive the Hansons in Central Park, or the horses? The city has lost a massive hemorrhaging of jobs, tremendous crime, and the debate is over who's the greater victim. So, that was New York before Giuliani.
So that to you is the overt attempt at compassion, which winds up with more crime and more suffering.
It wasn't just an overt attempt at compassion, it was a false compassion. It was what you might call trickle-down liberalism. If you give enough to interest groups in the city, they eventually will send money down into the neighborhoods and get to the poor.
But then Giuliani, the inverse of that is if you beat the poor up and tell them that they're not being responsible and that they owe more to society than they're giving, rather than society owing to the poor, that then they're going to be better off.
Well, first of all, your rhetoric is betraying your sentiments here. What Giuliani...
in fact, I'm quoting from your book.
No, exactly. Hardly. I never used that. Nobody never used that language. What Giuliani talked about was not what you said is reciprocity. That there's a mutuality of obligation under people like Dinkins. And under traditional liberals, society owed the poor owed nothing in return. There's a famous interchange between Lindsay and a welfare mother. The mother says to Lindsay, you owe me a living. And Lindsay says, you're right. Giuliani said, no, there's mutual obligation. And if we look back on welfare reform has allowed poor neighborhoods to revive. It's brought people out of their provincial confinement. One of the terrible things about welfare, and I don't think most people will know this, Lindsay doubles the welfare rolls in New York in the 1960s at a time when the black male unemployment rate is 4%. The white male unemployment rate is higher than that today. This was a catastrophe of extraordinary proportions because what welfare does is pull people out of the larger society, cuts them off from jobs, cuts them off from public life, and Giuliani reversed that.
I wonder if we have any viewers who want to call in right now. People in some of the neighborhoods that Fred's talking about. Frankly, he's talking about people of color in poor neighborhoods primarily, and whether you have rethought the Giuliani legacy, whether your sentiments regarding Rudy Giuliani have changed over the years since he's been out of office. Give us a call at the number on your screen, 212-251-0801. And Fred, one of the great paradoxes, I think, is that as the statistics show that crime was going down, in the highest crime, meaning the lowest income, meaning the predominantly black and Latino neighborhoods of the city, Giuliani was terribly, terribly unpopular in those neighborhoods, maybe increasingly unpopular, and remained so. Do you agree? And if so, how do you explain the paradox?
Easy. Not easy. Three things. First of all, firing Bratton was the biggest mistake he ever made, because Bratton had a feel for the city, had a feel for the neighborhoods. He replaced them with a dour technocrat named Howard Safer, who was cut off from his own police force, let alone neighborhoods. The second thing is important, and I go into this in the book, the opposition to Giuliani was always a political campaign. It was well organized and well funded. You have to remember, when Giuliani was elected, many people never forgave him for defeating the city's first African-American mayor. And when he first took office, people were afraid not that he wouldn't act, but that he would act, and that whatever he did would produce riots. It was what I call the riot ideology. Well, essentially, you have an ongoing organized political campaign. The media, and here I include you, spent more time attacking Giuliani for reducing crime than they did for Reverend Al for instigating the death of 7 people on 125th Street in Freddie's fire. I give a good deal of blame to the media. However, having said that, Giuliani exacerbated the problem. He wasn't sensitive enough, and I go into this in the second term. That's why when you say a Valentine, I don't think he's going to be happy with whole sections of the book. He did not cooperate with the book. As you've noticed in the acknowledgments, he didn't give me an interview until the book was already at the publisher. But there was a kind of media hysteria. I remember walking to a doctor's office, the great Ken Jaffe, my doctor in Brooklyn, and listening to people talk about how they were more afraid of the police than they were of criminals. This was a kind of media-induced hysteria, which New York liberals are very good at.
But the through line of the book is that Rudy Giuliani was a great mayor for the city, a transformative mayor for the city. In fact, that he saved the city perhaps from ruinous decline. So, I mean, the big picture, and certainly you point out the warts in terms of his contentiousness and how he's over the top in his personality and this kind of thing. But, I mean, in terms of a Valentine, you're painting him as not just a good mayor, but a great, pivotal mayor.
But those aren't the warts, Brian. The warts... It was that contentious personality that allowed him to get things done. The warts are somewhat different. The warts are, for instance, reflating the budget in the last 2 years. The warts have to do with firing Bratton, trying to sell the city water supply where Alan Hevesy blocked him. The Dorisman case. But I think if we look at his conduct overall, I ask people to perform a thought experiment. David Dinkinson won in 1993. Does anyone think the city would be what it is today? I mean, Anthony Weiner is an intelligent guy. He's a loyal Democrat, but it's hard to believe he would have preferred Dinkins to have won in '93.
There is a line of critique that goes, Giuliani among the Republicans and Bill Clinton among the Democrats were the luckiest politicians alive in the 1990s. They both happened to be there for this great economic boom that had nothing to do with them because it was generated by the tech expansion and the private sector in general. But it wound up lowering crime, along with the decline in crack use that was going on anyway, the fact that Dinkins had succumbed to pressure and instituted the Safe Streets, Safe City police build-up. He had hired Bratton to run the transit police.
No, he hadn't hired Bratton, but Bratton had been hired during his years. The MTA hired Bratton. Dinkins did not hire, but fair enough.
Fair enough. So that these outside pressures gave Clinton his expanding economy and gave Giuliani his decrease in crime.
I think that's wrong, both in regard to Clinton and Giuliani. Let me start with Giuliani. Crime and welfare decline dramatically before the economy recovers. I go into this in the book. I mean, it's easy to. Robert Rubin, Clinton's Treasury Secretary, recently said this in a speech, and I had to rebuke him. Essentially, the city economy does not recover doesn't begin to recover until the third quarter of 1996. Crime is dropping and welfare is dropping much earlier than that. These occur independent of the economy. They are enormous achievements. And as in the case of Clinton, yes, Clinton was helped by a rising economy, but he managed it very well. And Rubin did a brilliant job. Unfortunately, doesn't know a great deal about some other subjects.
Real quick, Mayor Bloomberg, is
Yes.
he a kinder, gentler Rudy Giuliani?
I wish that was the case. I mean, it seems to me that he's continued Giuliani's legacy in 2 essential areas, welfare and crime, with a little bit of backsliding on welfare. But other than that, he's a mix of David Dinkins and Nelson Rockefeller. He talks endlessly of partnerships. He's happy to do business with Reverend Al, Lenora Fulani, or any other low-life character in the city. He uses his private money to buy people off. I mean, Sam Roberts did a brilliant piece in the Times last week, something about his private money, and I felt this. Every time I speak on a platform, I discover I'm the only person not to have received a grant from Bloomberg. I want to know what I'm doing wrong. But no, I think Bloomberg is a moderately competent and at best mayor. I think that what Anthony Weiner said earlier about the stadium project is true, and Virginia Fields said, but think of it this way. Bloomberg is supposedly a brilliant businessman who wants to sell a $1 billion property for $100 million on land owned by the MTA, which is so broke it can't maintain the track, while ignoring Lower Manhattan, which was elected to reconstruct. That's a case to defeat the mayor.
We have 30 seconds left. the main piece of unfinished business that you write that Giuliani left, and I remember we talked about this at the time, was that he didn't get control of the unions as much as he should have, didn't get control of the city budget, which is still looking at long-term structural deficits.
Yes.
Is that a solvable problem?
It is. And here the Citizens Budget Commission, on which I'm tough on in some chapters in the book, got it right. In the long term, you have to bring labor costs under control. The city's problem has never been, even in the fiscal crisis of '75, never been revenue. It's always been costs outrunning revenue. If you don't get a hold of the contracts, if you don't make the unions more productive, the city will lurch from fiscal crisis to fiscal crisis. Other cities have occasional fiscal crises. We have them once a decade.
Fred Siegel, always thought-provoking and with as detailed a knowledge of the city as anybody I know. Thank you very much for coming on. And up next, we'll watch an excerpt of a new documentary film from the Bronx Artists Festival called Estilo Hip Hop. This is Brian Lehrer Live.
This is a story about the Living Reef, the oldest city on Earth. These wondrous, complex communities are the most diverse places on the planet and are so important that the ocean cannot exist without them. And we cannot exist without the oceans. Unfortunately, pollution and overfishing are destroying the world's coral reefs. We've already lost 25%, and the rest may perish within a generation, unless we act now. Protect the living reef, and we protect the ocean. Protect the ocean, and we protect ourselves.
Hello, I'm Lev Sverdov from the City College.
I'm Eugene Chandler from Brooklyn College. We're grateful to be chosen as 2005 Rhodes Scholars.
Before we go off to Oxford University, we want to say thank you.
To our brave parents for bringing us to the United States.
And to CUNY for giving us access to outstanding faculty and a first-rate education.
If you're looking for a great investment and believe that young people deserve educational opportunity,
invest in CUNY.
Now.
For 12 more reasons to invest in CUNY, go to cuny.edu.
This is Brian Lehrer Live. We are here every Wednesday night during the month of June at 7 o'clock, and our phones are always open at the number on your screen. If you live in the northern reaches of the city, don't think you have to travel to lower Manhattan to find quality arts events. Going on tonight through Saturday, the Bronx Artists Festival. They've got painting, they've got novelists, they've got documentary filmmakers, and we've got one of them right now. Activist, teacher, and documentary filmmaker Loira Limbal, whose film Estilo Hip Hop won an award. A Bronx recognizes its own award at the festival. We'll screen a little in a minute. First, let's meet the creator. Welcome to Brian Lehrer Live.
Thank you.
Your documentary focuses on hip-hop as a tool for political change in Latin America. But you're a born and bred New Yorker, right?
Yeah, I was born in Puerto Rico. My parents are Dominican and grew up in New York my whole life.
South Bronx girl?
Yep.
So how did you find yourself exporting hip-hop around the continent?
Well, you know, as growing up in New York, particularly in the Bronx, and, you know, my generation grew up in the hip-hop generation, definitely identified with hip-hop, and ended up living in Brazil for a while, and met a lot of people in the hip-hop community there, and became really inspired by what I saw people doing with hip-hop, really trying to use it as a tool to raise awareness and bring about political consciousness around different social issues. And linked up with my partner, who's the other director of the film, who's from Chile, and, you know, and kind of took it from there.
And in fact, let's take a look at a clip from the film, Estilo Hip Hop, and this scene does take place in Santiago, Chile.
Somos un grupo, una agrupación, una organización popular de hip hop, en el cual hacemos talleres en las poblaciones y venimos a apoyar todo lo que sea en beneficio del ser humano. Y como pobladores venimos a expresar nuestra rabia, nuestro descontento a través del hip hop.
Bueno, siempre se ha dicho en los medios de comunicación masivos que el hip hop es para bailar, es para vacilar y todo eso. Pero en realidad hoy en día el hip hop se organiza y más que criticar también tiene propuestas. Creemos en la educación antagónica al sistema, creemos en la educación que se hace desde la base, desde nuestra población, y en eso creemos y seguimos adelante. Creemos en los valores del ser humano, los cuales estamos conscientes que hoy día el gobierno no la respeta. La gente me dice que yo soy rebelde porque yo digo lo que pienso y hago lo que digo y sigo obstinado como ganado, pensando cómo hay que hacer para cambiar algo. Por ejemplo, que haya suficiente pega. Por ejemplo, que haya casa que no se llueva. Por ejemplo, que haya bibliotecas en la pobla. Ese tipo de cuestiones, ¿cachai mi onda?
Interesting clip, and really a use of hip-hop music in a very political context, overtly political context.
Yep. People actually define hip-hop and not just the music element, but all elements of hip-hop, graffiti art, and the dance, and DJing, as counterculture. You know, you ask a young person, like, what does hip-hop to you mean? It means resistance, which is really interesting, given the current state of hip-hop in the United States.
How would you compare the current hip-hop state of hip-hop in the United States?
As we all know, regardless of your age, today, like across in Idaho, everybody knows about hip-hop, right? Because it's our pop music currently, right? And it's very commercial and arguably has very little in terms of positive or relevant social messages, in it today, at least the music aspect of hip-hop.
Right. But critics say hip-hop also has a destructive side, misogyny, homophobia,
right,
the glorification of criminality in some strains of hip-hop.
Right, which is a commercial, strain of hip-hop, which is actually one of the reasons that I really felt compelled to do this film, because I grew up in a time period of hip-hop where hip-hop wasn't about those things. It was very much about, like you had groups like Public Enemy, people like Queen Latifah, who had, a very interesting message about Black pride, Black history, being a strong woman, being proud of the neighborhood that you're from, asking critical questions, being an aware young person. We fast forward to today where there's these issues of misogyny, homophobia, glorification of violence, etc. And so for me, part of it is to kind of dispel the idea that is all that hip-hop is. That's a phase of hip-hop. That's the phase that it's in right now, but that's not all of hip-hop, at least not to me. And so I kind of felt like, I want to throw something else in there, to kind of dispel that and broaden that definition of hip-hop.
And let's take another look at another clip from the film. This scene takes place in Sao Paulo, Brazil.
Disposição, vários têm. Muitos têm disposição. Bater de frente, vários fácil. O sistema não é tão forte como a gente pensa. Eles são apenas mais organizados do que nós. Disposição nós temos. Nós temos organização, disciplina, que nós não temos. Mas abaixar a cabeça para o sistema jamais, porque eu sou frio, mas eu choro. Desde que eu não vou brigar, tem tudo na questão de conhecer o lugar. Quanto vem, minha parte, quanto dá. Por quê?
A lot of people in that hall.
Yeah.
And what was he rapping about? My Spanish isn't so good, or my Portuguese isn't so good.
Right. Well, I mean, his whole message, in interviews and actually his lyrics, is talking about reality in poor neighborhoods of Brazil, and kind of like there's this running theme of who's the real criminal, right? Like poor people of color always, are criminalized, and like we're always to blame for all the problems in society. And so there's this running theme of who's really the real criminal. So talking about police brutality, corruption in government, and things like that. So that's what he was talking about.
Is it ironic that you're using an American genre to help promote local indigenous values in other countries? Is this just another form of American cultural imperialism, except it's coming from the South Bronx?
Right. I mean, you know, and that's, yeah, I think people, that's open to interpretation because definitely there's issues with it. It's like another form of cultural imperialism. You know, why is it hip-hop as opposed to samba that everybody all over the world? Because samba doesn't go all over the world the same way that U.S. cultural products travel the world.
In fact, they're using a U.S. cultural product to protest U.S. cultural influence.
Right, right. But, you know, so then the kind of part to that is that it is something that comes from oppressed peoples, right? And that there's that connection. And it is very similar. You actually go to Sao Paulo, you go to poor neighborhoods in Sao Paulo, and there's similarities. It's not the same thing. You know, third world is very different than the first world. But there's a lot of similarities with the issues that people are facing and combating on a day-to-day basis. So.
And I understand that Cuba even has its own government-sanctioned rap agency.
Yeah.
Now, I would be surprised to hear that Fidel Castro would embrace American popular culture in that way.
Well, the story goes, and the government-sponsored thing, I think, also might be like, you know, stretching it a little bit. But, you know, essentially when rap, which is a main element of hip-hop that's present in Cuba today, started emerging on Cuban soil, there was a lot of kind of backlash from the government because, again, they saw it as just like another American import that we're being bombarded with. Time passes, a lot of organizing from young people in the hip-hop community really trying to say, you know, claim and make a case for, no, this is, you know, something that we identify with it and we're talking about our reality. We're not mirroring, you know, American reality. So a lot of dialogue happens, and essentially what came about was the Cuban Rap Agency, which is a subdivision of the Ministry of Culture in Cuba.
We have 30 seconds left. Is there a cultural affinity between American hip-hop artists and these various Latin American hip-hop artists, or are they just doing their own separate thing in a different context?
I think there is a cultural affinity, but I guess the best way to sum it up is just, you know, there's a cultural affinity. You're looking to something that came from the U.S., but then there's also an awareness and a poignant critique of the state of hip-hop in the U.S. So you're not just imitating what you're seeing, even though you may identify with it. Well, you may identify, you kind of choose and pick what you identify with and what, you know, what serves you and your purpose.
Loira Limbal, thank you very much for being on Brian Lehrer Live. Her documentary, Estilo Hip Hop, won an award at the BRIO, which stands for Bronx Honors Its Own Short Film Festival, which starts at Lehman Lovinger's Theater at 250 Bedford Park Boulevard West. Tonight, that's part of the first ever Bronx Artists Festival, which runs through Saturday. And that's it for tonight's Brian Lehrer Live. We want to know what you think about the show. Email your polite comments, your angry rants, and your useful suggestions to Brian@CUNY TV, not .com, not .org, Brian@CUNY.TV. We'll be here live every Wednesday night at 7, all through the month of June. And remember to check out my daily radio show on WNYC, New York Public Radio. That's every weekday morning at 10 on WNYC, on FM 93.9 and AM 820. Tomorrow morning, New Jersey gubernatorial hopeful Doug Forrester. Have a great night.